you have a gift, and you point to yourself and say, I have a gift. I have a gift. You do. The gift I'm talking about in this moment is the gift of life. So you can say that again. Oh yeah, now you have a gift. I get it. You have many gifts. We'll get there. But you have a gift. It's called the gift of life for a purpose. And you know, when you have a gift, has anybody ever received a gift in a package like 3 years ago and it's just still sitting there? Probably not. We receive a gift and we begin to unwrap it, begin to take access, put it into use. And so it is with this gift of life. The covenant of life is not simply to be alive. The covenant of life is to be in our aliveness. To continually be in our aliveness. You know, I truly believe that that's why the end of what we call physical life on the earth plane, that word death, is shrouded in mystery. No one can really know. And the reason for that perhaps is it keeps us in our aliveness. Do you realize the very final step you will take in this physical life is a step into discovery, a step into greater self-expression? And so the more we embrace that every day of our life, the more we are awake and we consciously think about, am I living my aliveness? Not just staying alive, but am I staying in my aliveness? And what does that mean? That's what we want to talk about today. 2 weeks ago, when we experienced Easter and Unity, we look at that in a very mystical or metaphysical sense. And I quoted a passage of Scripture that comes from Romans 8 and 14, and this is based on the Message translation. But it's talking about this resurrecting, this life principle, this part of our nature that keeps us in our aliveness. And from Romans 8:14, it says, God's Spirit beckons. There are things to do and places to go. The resurrection life you have received from God is not a timid, grave-tending life. It's adventurously expectant, greeting God with openness and trust, fully connected, asking, what's next, God? To be in our aliveness. I say often that as long as you've got skin on, you have something yet to be expressed, to be discovered, to be put into use through your understanding of that. Esther Hicks of Abraham, Esther Hicks says, the goal in life is to live tuned in, tapped in, turned on, ready to be of service. I like that. I had one of the professors when I was in Unity Institute, the seminary, his name was Reverend Earl Anderson. And he said this all the time. He said every morning when he woke up, he would say, good morning, God. What's happening today? Count me in. This is Earl. It's a good reminder. What's happening today? Count me in. I'm going to consciously cooperate with this creative life presence. I'm going to show up and be plugged in, tuned in, turned on to the truth of who I am and showing up for that. So what does it mean to really be in your aliveness and to be in touch with your creative potential? Using it, you know, when giving, expressing, when we give something, when we put it to use, it increases our capacity to use, to express, keeps us on our growing edge. I read this week about a family with 5 children. Their children were spending an awful lot of time behind screens. And so they had a family meeting and they said, we just want you to have more time really nurturing your creative potential. And so they initiated a new family rule, which the kids were not very happy about, because what that meant is the parents collected all iPhones and all iPads at 6 p.m., and they put them in the parents' room at night until the next morning. And so this is what the mom said. She said, each evening at 6 p.m., I now collect all the cell phones and iPads from our kids. And I keep them in my room until morning. Well, last night I discovered that the kids had all set alarms to go off at various times on their devices throughout the night in my room. She said, I'm impressed with their ingenuity and their team effort because they rarely work together. But they are still all grounded. It was not a good use of their creative potential. Can you imagine that? That we all have a creative potential. And so how are you with that? It's not just about creating. I was talking to Gail Ray recently. She's been taking a pottery class, and I love hearing about when people are taking classes and creating things, and sometimes it's easier to see what we created. But do you realize you're using your creative potential all the time? Whether it's coming up with a way to get back at your parents in a funny but not so funny way at 3 o'clock in the morning every time an alarm's going off, or however we're using our time, our talents, our ingenuity. There's a very popular parable that talks about this. And it comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. It's often referred to as the parable of the talents. Now, when we hear the word talent, we think about skills and talents. But in that culture, a talent was a currency, some money. But in the bigger picture, what these parables are pointing to is they're pointing to the reality of who we are as spirit. And so they're pointing us to discover a spiritual truth about ourselves. And the way the story goes, this parable from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, it says, a landowner was needing to leave, and while he was going away, he entrusted 3 of his stewards with some resources. He gave one of them 5 talents, one of them 2, and one of them 1, for which they were to be responsible and take care of them while he left. And as the parable goes, he goes away, and when he comes back, he goes to the first one to whom he gave 5, and he says, what did you do with the 5? And the person said, I invested it. I put it to use. Look, I have even more. And he said, well done. And to the one that had been given 2, he said, well, what did you do with your 2? He said, I put it to use. I invested it. I got a return on my investment. He said, good for you. And to the one who had been given 1, he said, what did you do with your 1? And he said, let me go find it. Here, I buried it over here. Here it is. Let me brush it off. I saved it for you. And the point of the story is, I didn't give it to you to save because you really lost it. If you're not putting it to use, you're putting it to loss. That if you can understand it at a level of that, the scripture that is highly misunderstood, you begin to understand it in a spiritual, a mystical type of way. The scripture that says, for whoever has will be given more. They will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. Because if we're not recognizing what we have, it's as if we don't even have it. If we're not putting out and cultivating our gifts, our talent, if we're not putting it to use, putting it into circulation, then we are putting it to waste. It's a simple line. I loved when Trent said, I'm going to be 72 this year, and I'm creating my, which album? 18th album. It's like staying on our growing edge, staying on our cutting edge, whatever that looks like for you. Brene Brown, who has become very popular through her books, she's a PhD, American professor, lecturer, author, podcast host. She spent over 20 years in grounded theory research and in qualitative study on the human potential and resilience. And she wrote, we all have gifts and talents. When we cultivate those gifts and share them with the world, we create a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. But squandering our gifts brings distress to our life. As it turned out, it's not merely benign or too bad if we don't use the gifts. We pay for it with our well-being. That studies have shown when we don't use and when we don't express what is ours to put into the world, uniquely yours, just as unique as your fingerprints are, Whatever is your flavor, your color, your character, your way of expressing and putting your gifts into the world. If we don't do that, she says we struggle, we feel disconnected. We may feel weighed down by emptiness, by frustration, by resentment, shame, disappointment, fear, even grief. Benjamin Franklin knew that. He knew the story of the talents and sharing those, and Benjamin Franklin actually wrote a poem about it. He said, "Hide not your talents, for use they were made. What use is a sundial if it's hiding in the shade?" Quite beautiful. So in every spiritual tradition, philosophical, you're going to find that the way Jesus said it was, shine your light. Don't put it away and cover it up. Express yourself. Put your gifts out there. Put into circulation your time, your talent, your resources. Invest them as you invest your presence, as you invest yourself in a way that keeps you on the growing edge. You see, the reason we're meant to do this is as long as we're on the growing edge of our own potential, then we're discovering more and more and more about us, about ourselves. We begin to realize that we're not generating all of these ideas. We're not generating these abilities. We are developing them and then allowing these abilities to express through us. And so when we begin to do that, it grows us. The word for that, one of the most ancient words, comes from Sanskrit, and it's called seva, S-E-V-A. How many of you are familiar with seva? You'll hear it in the yoga tradition, different traditions, but seva means to express yourself in service to the whole or to the divine or to the creative presence, but to express yourself in service. Seva means to serve. Now, it's often translated as selfless service. And unfortunately, a lot of people hear that as sacrificial service. That's kind of something that's in it just rolls around in our collective psyche and our DNA. And because of that, and because at many times in your life, you may have been pushed and forced. You may have been should on and shamed about things like that, to where you're at a point in your life and you're saying, by God, I'm not doing anything I don't want to do. It's about balancing those scales. Well, that's not what seva really means. Journalist Helen Avery writes about seva. She said, growing up, I often heard about seva and selfless service, and I equated it to like a mother who sacrificed her desires for her family or her children. She said, I always thought about service as sacrificial. She said, I had to unlearn that. And I'm still learning that selfless service is not about sacrifice. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. Seva, devoted service, to express yourself in service of, is authentic self-discovery and self-expression. It honors the source, the greater presence that flows through you. It honors the infinite flow of life that animates us. It honors yourself as being here for a purpose. It honors others when we recognize their gifts. And that's what seva is. It opens our heart to discover that we are an instrument, a channel. We can cultivate these skills and abilities. We had a beautiful ceremony here yesterday that Elder Sharon Oxendine, one of our members, and she's a revered elder in the Lumbee tribe. She just led this beautiful ceremony. And as a part of it, Sarah shared some music. And people were talking about how blessed they were, and it's because two people authentically shared their gifts. And what I know about both of these is they've invested a lot of time in study and development of their skill. I was talking to Sarah afterward, and she said, I've spent a lot of time in music theory so that I could get out of the way and the music can play through me. It's the same with peace. Have you noticed sometimes in your life when there seems to be a theme that's coming up, like you're trying to rush everywhere you go, or you get frustrated everywhere you go. It's as if the universe is trying to teach us, okay, there's something else that wants to be born through you. There's another response. There's another skill set. There's something else still. There's another something that wants to express a deeper level of love that wants to express through you. If you look at the Tao Te Ching, to me, it has some powerful wisdom that helps tie together Christianity and Buddhism and how these sacred threads come together. The Tao means your life force and the guiding principles around that life force. And so from the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It's hidden, but it's always present. When you look for it, there's nothing to see. When you listen for it, there's nothing to hear. But when you use it, it's inexhaustible. That when you become an instrument of peace, peace is inexhaustible. Love is inexhaustible. These qualities, the divine attributes and qualities, creativity, insight, imagination, when we begin to use these things, we then grow into being able to use them in greater ways, and making deeper impacts in our own life and perhaps in the lives of others. So let's look at just a few moments let's break it down a little bit. How do we make this practical? Well, acknowledge what you have to give, and acknowledge what you can cheerfully give. Let's look at that. Number one, acknowledge what you have. I've noticed in my life the times when I've been stuck or frustrated. Now, think about the word frustration is literally like potential gets frustrated. When our potential is frustrated, there's a frustration, a staleness, a stifleness. How many of you ever reached a point of your life you've just been stale and frustrated and stuck? We recognize that. What I've discovered years ago, that when I find myself in those times, and believe me, I do, we all do, that I go back to the fundamentals. One of the greatest things you can do is a part of acknowledging what you have, and for me, it's a gratitude practice. It's a gratitude journal. I'll give you an example. This morning, I started my morning reflecting and thinking about something for which I was deeply grateful. Now, I'll often start writing those things, but I don't just write a list to get a list done. I write it so that it begins to spark that within me, to really help me get in touch with what it feels like to be grateful. And what came up for me this morning when I was taking some time to be grateful was Sharon again. Yesterday in our ceremony, at a point in time, she shared a beautiful poem that she wrote. And I'm sitting there in this circle of people, and the tears are I'm like, why did I even put on mascara? The tears are just streaming down my face, and I'm trying to find a tissue, and I'm looking around, and almost everybody in the whole circle is crying, and she's reading this poem she wrote. And Sharon finishes, and she said, wow, I've never had a group receive it like this. We were all crying. And she told us a little about when she wrote that in a class, and it wasn't necessarily received in the same light. But I let it sink in. I thought about, there's such talent. I'm so thankful for the people that I can see talent in their lives. I'm thankful for the way those words, sometimes almost a poem or a song, may flow through me. I'm thankful for the way that I can be moved to tears. Do you know that's a gift? I haven't always been that soft. I haven't always been able to be moved to tears. I had shame around that. I had some old feelings about that meant you weren't strong if you let yourself be tearful. And so to really spend time and to think about what are some things that you have, and that's gratitude. So we begin by thinking about the gifts. What is it that I have? What are the things that I experience for which I am deeply grateful? To make that a part of your practice, a part of your life. It's as if it begins to prime the pump. It begins to prime the pump of potential. Because when we genuinely spend time giving thanks, we're priming the pump for what is. And remember, what is always wanting to express its capacity to be. And so give thanks for what you have. Spend time acknowledging those gifts. Number two, so we acknowledge what we have, we give thanks for those things. And then number two, we acknowledge what we have to give. The civil rights leader Howard Thurman once said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive." Because what the world needs most is people who have come alive. People that are engaged in being alive in a way that is compassionate, in a way that acknowledges and honors what we call the divine, but it's just good old-fashioned respect, that it's human respect for one another, that we don't cross those lines to demonize another or to harm another if we ever realize that we were doing that. We're doing our very best to be a life-affirming presence. And so we begin to acknowledge what we have to give. You have more things to give than you may even know you have to give. Here's an example. Listen to this letter that was written on the back of a napkin. "Dear latte lady, those hearts you make in my latte foam, oh my. I know it's a little thing, but getting lattes is an extra special, only sometimes treat for me, and those wispy hearts make it even nicer. I know you're on your feet all day. I know you probably go home reeking of so much coffee you may not even like it anymore. And I know people get crabby if their order is slow or if it gets messed up. But I also know you're a kind soul, and most importantly, you are you. The only you there is, and that means something. And though I totally don't know your name, love the girl in the corner with the laptop." You always have something to give. When we take an extra moment and look at someone in the eyes. One of the things I love to do is if I notice a person is checking me out in the grocery, not checking me out, but well, that's pretty good too, but can you edit that out, Nova? When groceries are being checked out in the grocery store. Oh, where was I going with that? Preach! To look in the eyes and say, "You have a beautiful smile. This is just not going to work now. Let's go into the next step." Just go to point number 2. Okay, I think you get the point. There's always a way you can connect and genuinely mean it. I'll never forget one time, Gail Ray and I were coming back from a workshop some of the board had been to, and we stopped at a place called Buc-ee's. If you've never been, it's like Martha Stewart met Walmart, and I don't even know how to mash it up, but it's this grocery store giant thing. And so we needed gas, and we stopped, and I said, "You've got to see this place." We went in, and when we were checking out, this young girl was just so happy. I mean, she really was alive. And so I just said, "You have a beautiful spirit." And she said, "It's the Holy Spirit." And she was just, and I thought about, I wonder how the rest of her day went, but I know how the rest of my day went, because we sparked something in each other. And so you don't do it just to check it off a list. You do it because when you acknowledge those gifts, when you acknowledge that light, when you acknowledge that effort, when you acknowledge that person in the checkout line who you know has been catching grief all day long, and you pause to say, "I do appreciate your smile. I appreciate your patience." Do you realize you spark something in them, and you may be as powerful as the latte girl, because the lady that received that has been telling the whole world about what she received one day. It meant that much to her. You all, each and every one of us, have something to give. So we acknowledge what we have. We acknowledge what we have to give. Richard, would you give us that song? The third point then is to be a cheerful giver. The word cheerful is not something we use so much in our culture anymore, but what it means in its roots, to be a cheerful giver, It's to be giving from the aliveness of life. To give in a sense that you realize that it is a gift to give. And as best you can, to give in a way that is kind and loving and caring. That we can do those things. We need to give it to ourselves first, because if your cup's not full, you're not going to be able to give from a place of deficit. Amen? We have to find ways to tend to ourselves, to care for ourselves, to have our cups filled so that we can give to the world. This is a true story about a man named Juan. He's now a junior high school teacher. And someone asked him, what inspired him to teach junior high? Do you realize that that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially today? And he's a great teacher. And so he was interviewed and asked, what inspired you to be a teacher? And this was what he told. He said, when I was a little boy, one afternoon, I discovered that if I threw rocks across the fence, I could hear a crashing noise. And it felt kind of naughty, but it also felt fun. And so I kept heaving rocks over, and I would hear something break and crash. And he said, but I got caught. The man who lived next door came to my house and told my parents that I had been throwing stones. And he said he wanted to take me over to his house so he could show me a few things. And he said I'd been in trouble before, so my parents were all too happy to say, yes, we'll be glad to accompany him over. So they allowed the neighbor to take little Juan over, and the parents followed behind. He said, I sheepishly followed that man into his house, through the back door, out the yard. Next to the fence, I saw a greenhouse, and I noticed the windows had been cracked. He said, so I was holding my breath, and I literally started shaking as I walked in. He said, but the man took me down rows of plants, and he began showing me flowers. He said he showed me that he loved these gladiolas. He told me why they were large and how they bloomed in so many colors. And then he spent quite a few time telling me about violets, because they were his wife's favorite. It had been her greenhouse and she was no longer there, but he loved the violets. It made him think of his wife. And then he showed me orchids and how they were difficult to grow and what you did when they bloomed. And then he got some dirt and some pots, and he actually had me move in some of the plants. He said we spent about an hour, and he just showed me all those plants. He said I was amazed. There was no lecture, no shame, no punishment. And after an hour of showing me everything he loved about his flowers and his greenhouse and what it took for them to grow, he turned to me and said, I want to thank you for coming and letting me show you this. He said, as I walked back home, my parents were silent, but I felt strangely alive and excited. He said, in that moment, I knew I was going to be a teacher. That man had taught me through love. He could have yelled about the glass. He could have punished me for being cruel, but instead he took a few thoughtful minutes to share with me the fragrances, the colors that meant so much. He took time to show me what he loved, which means he took time to show me love. And he said, that day I decided I wanted to help people be in touch with that kind of love. And today he's recognized as one of the best junior high teachers around. So we all have a gift. And that gift expresses through you, through your talents, your unique fingerprints, your presence, your ability to show up and make a difference. And so this week, let us spend time giving thanks for what we have. And then remembering that we have those to put into expression, and so to open up to new ways of sharing our gifts, our talents. So today it was divinely planned. All of our volunteers have tables set up, and if you're wondering, how am I going to share a gift? We can actually help you. We're even going to be teaching a class. Karen Eve is going to be offering a class in May about how to find your spiritual gifts. So if you want some help and you're looking for opportunities, we can help. But most importantly, I ask you to inquire within. You know what's yours to do. So let's anchor this. I invite you to close your eyes just a moment. Use me, oh God, I stand for you, and here I'll abide as you show me all that I can do. That song really says all that I must do, and the reason that it says all that I must do is because we all know what it feels like when you know you just have to do something. When I went into ministry, they said, if you can do anything else, please do it. And I thought, well, I could even work at McDonald's. I could do lots of different things. But I realized there was nothing else I can do to fully express what I was here to express, that I had to do this. It was calling me that deeply. So some things we just feel like we have to express. We have to do this. And then there's other things that call us to the edge. It may even feel uncomfortable. Someone may be recognizing these gifts and abilities in us even before we do. A man sat on a piano and he would play in a bar night after night, and he was a great piano player. But the patrons began to talk to him and said, "Do you sing? Could you sing?" And the man said, "Well, not really." But the man knew in his heart he had a song. And people kept asking, "We don't want to just hear the piano. We want to hear you sing." And finally, one night he let loose and he sang a song called Mona Lisa. And that man is Nat King Cole. That sometimes other people are recognizing your gifts and calling them out before you may feel ready. And so what are you being called to presence through your presence in a more authentic way, in a more profound way? What are you being called to literally put in circulation, to put it out there? What are you being called to acknowledge and to share? How are you being called into your aliveness? So we open to that spirit in which we live and move and have our being. We open to the truth that we're all created with unique fingerprints, unique gifts to share. Even though they may look similar, they carry our essence forward, and they carry us forward in the discovery of our own essential nature, which is God, which is love. And so we give thanks for this opportunity to express, to give, to presence, and to grow into the aliveness of our being through that. So use me, oh God, I stand